In the pre-dawn darkness of June 17, 1944, on the island of Saipan, diesel engines coughed to life across a Japanese assembly area north of Hill 164.6. 44 tanks, mostly Type 95 Ha-Gos light tanks, supplemented by a few Type 97 Chi-Ha mediums, formed up for what their crews believed would be a decisive counterattack against the American beachhead. The men inside were veterans. Many had fought in China since 1937, where their tanks had crushed enemy positions, routed infantry, and dominated the battlefield with impunity. They trusted their machines. They believed in their doctrine. And they were utterly, tragically wrong. What happened in the next few hours would not be a battle of equals, but a revelation. One that exposed the fatal gap between Japan's armored doctrine and the industrial reality of modern warfare. It was not American tanks or artillery that first shattered Japanese confidence that morning. It was the .50 caliber Browning M2 heavy machine gun, an infantry support weapon mounted on jeeps, half-tracks, and fixed emplacements, firing standard armor-piercing rounds that punched cleanly through the Ha-Gos 12mm armor as if it were paper. For the Japanese tankers, this was not just defeat. It was the collapse of a foundational belief that their armor would protect them. The story of the Type 95 Ha-Gos begins not in combat, but in calculation. In 1933, the Imperial Japanese Army recognized a critical flaw in its armored forces. Its primary tank, the Type 89 Ha-Gos, could manage only 15 miles per hour, adequate for walking speed infantry support, but useless for the mechanized warfare emerging in Europe. Japanese planners, observing Soviet and German developments, sought a faster, more mobile vehicle that could keep pace with motorized infantry moving at 40 miles per hour by truck, navigate the rough terrain of Manchuria and China, and be produced within Japan's limited industrial capacity. The Army Technical Bureau issued specifications in July 1933. A 7-ton tank, armed with a 37mm gun, capable of 40 kilometers per hour, 25 miles per hour, with armor sufficient to resist rifle and machine gun fire, and, critically, simple to manufacture and maintain. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries received the contract. Engineer Tomio Hara, already known for his work on the Type 89, took charge. His most significant innovation was the bell crank suspension, a system of paired road wheels connected by horizontal arms to a central pivot, which absorbed shocks effectively while using minimal parts. By June 1934, the first prototype was complete. Field trials in Manchuria and Japan confirmed its strengths. On paved roads, it reached 45 kilometers per hour. Cross-country, it maintained 25 to 30 kilometers per hour. Its turning radius was remarkably tight for a tracked vehicle. The suspension handled rough terrain better than expected. Power came from a Mitsubishi A6120VD air-cooled diesel engine, producing 120 horsepower at 1,800 RPM. Diesel was chosen deliberately. It was less flammable than gasoline and more readily available across Japan's empire, especially in Manchuria and Southeast Asia, where gasoline supplies were scarce. With a 34-gallon fuel capacity, the tank had a road range of 130 miles, sufficient for operations in China's vast interior. But the design had flaws. The suspension caused violent pitching on uneven ground, making it nearly impossible to aim while moving and exhausting crews on long advances. Engineers added braces between bogie pairs, creating the Manchurian suspension, which helped but did not eliminate the problem. More critically, armor was thin by any modern standard. 12 millimeters on the turret and upper hull, 9 millimeters on the roof and floor, 6 millimeters on less critical surfaces. Japanese designers calculated this was sufficient to stop 303 British or 7.92 millimeter Mauser rifle rounds at typical combat ranges, adequate against Chinese forces who possessed almost no anti-tank weapons. The crew layout compounded the vulnerability. Only 3 men operated the tank: the driver, front left, a Hull machine gunner, front right, operating a Type 97 7.7 millimeter machine gun, and a single commander in the turret. This commander bore an impossible burden. He had to command the tank, operate the 37 millimeter Type 94 main gun, load it manually, operate a rear-facing 7.7 millimeter machine gun, and communicate with other tanks, all while standing on the hull floor with no turret basket. Only 1 in 4 Ha-Gos carried a radio. The rest relied on signal flags, which were useless in smoke, darkness, or broken terrain. The turret rotated by hand crank, requiring immense physical effort. Vision was limited to narrow periscopes and small vision ports. A man of average height could look over the turret from outside. In its intended role, colonial warfare against poorly equipped opponents, the Ha-Go excelled. From 1937 onward in China, it was devastating. Its 37 millimeter gun destroyed fortifications. Its machine guns cut down infantry. Its mobility enabled rapid exploitation of breakthroughs. Japanese crews gained confidence, even arrogance. They assumed their tank was universally capable, not merely optimized for a specific limited scenario. This assumption was tested at Khalkhin Gol in 1939, where Japanese forces clashed with the Soviet Union along the Mongolian border. Here, the Ha-Go faced BT-5 and BT-7 tanks mounting 45 millimeter guns with superior armor penetration. Soviet armor up to 22 millimeter thick was largely immune to the Ha-Go's 37 millimeter rounds at anything beyond point-blank range. On July 2, 1939, the Japanese 3rd Tank Regiment attacked Soviet positions, initially destroying 32 Soviet tanks through aggressive tactics. But Soviet counterattacks revealed the truth. Ha-Gos were outmatched. Soviet guns penetrated Japanese armor at ranges where Japanese shells bounced harmlessly off Soviet turrets. Dozens of Ha-Gos were lost. The lesson was clear. The Ha-Go was obsolete against peer adversaries. But Japanese leadership absorbed it only partially. They focused on tactical improvements, better crew training, more aggressive maneuvers, rather than fundamental redesign. In China, the Ha-Go remained effective, reinforcing the illusion of adequacy. When war erupted across the Pacific in December 1941, Japanese tank units achieved stunning successes. In Malaya, Ha-Gos navigated rubber plantations and jungle trails British commanders deemed impassable for armor, supporting the rapid advance to Singapore. In the Philippines, on December 22, 1941, Ha-Gos engaged American M3 Stuart light tanks near Demortis, the first U.S. tank versus tank battle in the Pacific. Both mounted 37 millimeter guns, but the Stuart's armor, up to 32 millimeters, was nearly triple the Ha-Gos. At close range in jungle fighting, Japanese crews destroyed one Stuart, reinforcing their confidence. By 1944, however, the war had changed. The Americans were no longer fighting with light tanks and minimal anti-armor support. They had industrial might, superior doctrine, and weapons the Japanese could not match. Nowhere was this more evident than on Saipan, a 72-square-mile island in the Mariana Chain, just 1,250 miles from Tokyo. If captured, it would place B-29 bombers within range of the Japanese home islands. Japan fortified it with 30,000 troops, double U.S. intelligence estimates, and committed its most powerful armored unit in the Pacific, the 9th Tank Regiment, commanded by Colonel Takashi Goto. It fielded 44 tanks, 31 Type 95 Ha-Gos and 13 Type 97 Chi-Ha mediums, armed with a 57mm gun but still thinly armored. The Americans landed on June 15th. By dawn on June 17th, 20,000 Marines were ashore, supported by M4A2 Sherman medium tanks landing from LSTs. The Sherman weighed 31.8 tons, over 4 times the Ha-Gos' 7.4 tons. Its frontal hull armor was 51mm thick, sloped at 56 degrees, giving it effective protection, equivalent to 75mm, against anti-tank fire. It mounted a 75mm M3 gun, capable of penetrating the Ha-Gos' armor from over a mile away. Its 5-man crew had dedicated roles, radios in every tank, and a gyro-stabilized gun for firing on the move. But it was not the Shermans that first broke the Japanese attack. At 0330 hours, as the Ha-Gos advanced through the darkness toward the 2nd Marine Division's lines, 50 caliber machine gunners opened fire. The Browning M2 fired a 12.7mm armor-piercing round at 2,900 feet per second. At 200 meters, it could penetrate 23mm of face-hardened steel, nearly twice the Ha-Gos' maximum armor thickness. Marines watched in disbelief as their tracers punched through tank hulls. Rounds entered one side and exited the other. Engines seized. Crews bailed out, only to be cut down by rifle fire. One gunner, firing from a half-track at 150 meters, saw his rounds strike a Ha-Gos side. The commander slumped forward, killed by a bullet that pierced the 12mm turret armor, passed through his body and exited the opposite side. Another Marine, positioned near the airfield, fired into a Ha-Gos engine compartment. The Finn 6mm rear armor offered no resistance. The diesel engine seized. The tank stopped, became a stationary target, and was abandoned. Japanese crews were stunned. In China, bullets had ricocheted off their armor. At Khalkhin Gol, Soviet anti-tank rifles had been the threat, not machine guns. Now, standard infantry weapons were killing them. A captured tank officer later told interrogators he assumed the Americans had deployed a secret weapon. He could not accept that a conventional heavy machine gun could defeat a tank. As the Ha-Go assault faltered, Sherman's moved forward. The contrast was catastrophic. Japanese 37mm and 57mm shells bounced off the Sherman's frontal armor, leaving only dents. One Ha-Go commander, after his tank was disabled by 50 caliber fire, traversed his turret and fired at a Sherman at close range. The 37mm round struck the turret face and did nothing. The Sherman rotated its turret with mechanical precision, fired a single 75mm round, and blew the Ha-Go apart. By mid-morning, the counterattack was over. 31 Japanese tanks lay destroyed on the battlefield. Nearly 1,000 Japanese soldiers were dead, including most of the tank crews. For the Marines, the victory was grim but decisive. As they walked among the wreckage, they examined the Ha-Gos up close. The armor holes were clean, round penetrations, large enough to fit a fist. Inside, the scene was worse, cramped, crude, and utterly vulnerable. The commander's position had no seat, no protection, no room to move. The hull machine gunner's cubby was barely large enough to hold a man. Everything was rudimentary, designed for a war against peasants, not industrial powers. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese crews was profound. Those captured spoke of betrayal, that their leaders had sent them into battle with equipment they knew was inadequate. One veteran tanker, who had fought in China since 1937, admitted, "I believe Japan would win through superior spirit. After Saipan, I knew spirit cannot overcome material disadvantage." These reports were compiled and disseminated across the Pacific. The lesson was clear. Japanese tanks were not a serious threat. Standard marine weapons, 50 caliber machine guns, bazookas, 37mm anti-tank guns, were sufficient to destroy them. Fear of armor evaporated. In subsequent battles, the pattern repeated. On Tinian, July 1944, 7 Ha-Gos were destroyed in counterattacks. On Peleliu, September 1944, Japanese tanks were buried in caves as static pillboxes, acknowledging they had no chance in mobile warfare. On Iwo Jima, February 1945, Colonel Takechi Nishi's 26th Tank Regiment buried their tanks in volcanic ash up to the turrets, using them as armored bunkers. Even then, they were vulnerable. 50 caliber rounds penetrated turret armor. Flamethrowers cooked crews alive through open hatches. Bazookas punched through from any angle. On Okinawa, April to June 1945, the last major battle, Japan committed its 27th Tank Regiment, 13 Ha-Gos and 14 Chi-Ha mediums, against over 800 American tanks. In a May 4th counteroffensive, most were destroyed within hours by Shermans, bazookas, artillery, and 50 caliber fire. The numerical disparity was 30-1. The qualitative gap was even wider. Meanwhile, Japan's industrial reality made improvement impossible. Engineers had designed better tanks, the Type 3 Chinu, 75mm gun, and Type 4 Chito, even heavier armament. But these existed only in prototypes or tiny production runs. Only 166 Chinus were built during the entire war. 2 Chitos saw no combat. Resources were diverted to kamikaze aircraft and coastal defense for the expected invasion of the home islands. Tanks were a low priority. American production, by contrast, was almost incomprehensible. The Detroit Tank Arsenal, built by Chrysler on 567 acres in Warren, Michigan, covered 1.5 million square feet of production space. Operating 24/7 with 3 shifts, it employed 5,000 workers, including thousands of women, the famed Rosie the Riveters, who welded armor, assembled turrets, and installed engines. In December 1942 alone, it produced 97 Sherman tanks, more than Japan built in an entire year. It was not alone. Fisher Tank Arsenal, Grand Blanc, Michigan, produced over 11,000 Shermans. American Locomotive Company, Schenectady, New York, built 2,300. Baldwin Locomotive Works, Philadelphia, produced over 1,500 while maintaining locomotive output. Lima Locomotive Works, Ohio, built the first M4A1 Sherman, named Michael, now at the Bovington Tank Museum. 10 major manufacturers, plus countless subcontractors, fed a supply chain that delivered tanks to battlefields in Europe and Asia with clockwork efficiency. By war's end, American factories had built 49,234 Sherman tanks. Japan produced approximately 2,300 Ha-Gos from 1936 to 1943, a ratio of over 20-1. But the disparity was even greater in capability. The Sherman's 5-man crew, radio in every tank, gyro-stabilized gun, and 2,500-mile track life versus 1,000 for the Ha-Go made it vastly more effective. It was not the best tank of the war. It was outgunned by German Panthers and Tigers, but it was good enough, and available in overwhelming numbers. In the Pacific, against 1930s-era Japanese designs, it was overwhelmingly superior. After the war, captured Ha-Gos were shipped to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for detailed analysis. American engineers documented every flaw. Armor, 12 millimeters maximum, faith-hardened, effective against rifle fire, useless against 50 caliber AP. Crew space, 50 cubic feet for the commander, versus 150 plus in the Sherman. Turret ring, 1,200 millimeters diameter, too small for efficient operation. Vision, crude periscopes and small ports, forcing commanders to expose themselves. Communications, radios in only 25% of tanks. Fire control, no stabilization, manual turret traverse. The verdict was unequivocal. The Ha-Go was suitable only for colonial warfare against poorly equipped opponents. It was not designed for modern industrial warfare against a peer adversary. Any weapon more powerful than a rifle could defeat it. The comparison with the Sherman revealed deeper truths about design philosophy. Where the Ha-Go sacrificed crew efficiency for simplicity, the Sherman prioritized combat effectiveness, dedicated crew roles, all-around vision, power traverse, organized ammunition storage. Where the Ha-Go's armor was a thin shell, the Sherman's was sloped, thick, and angled for maximum protection. Where the Ha-Go relied on visual signals, the Sherman had integrated radio networks for coordinated operations. But the most telling difference was not in the tanks themselves. It was in the industrial systems that produced them. The United States had mobilized its entire economy for total war. Factories that built cars now built tanks at rates that defied pre-war imagination. Women entered heavy industry in unprecedented numbers. Engineers incorporated combat lessons into continuous design improvements. Supply chains moved raw materials to factories and finished tanks to ports with relentless efficiency. Japan had no such system. Its economy was strained by years of war in China before Pearl Harbor. Its factories lacked automation and mass production expertise. Its access to raw materials, steel, rubber, oil, was severed by American submarines, which sank over 500 Japanese merchant ships in 1943–44 alone. The nation that had challenged the world's greatest industrial power was discovering, tank by tank, the true cost of that challenge. For the Japanese crews on Saipan that June morning, the lesson was brutal and absolute. They had been sent to fight a superpower with equipment designed for a different war. Their armor was paper. Their tactics were obsolete. Their courage was real, but irrelevant against the arithmetic of industrial might. For the Marines, the lesson was equally clear. Industrial superiority wins modern wars. Courage, training, and fighting spirit matter, but they cannot overcome a 20-to-1 numerical disadvantage combined with generational gaps in equipment quality. The factories in Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland were as vital to victory as any battlefield hero. And there was a small practical truth they carried forward. When you see a Japanese Ha-Go, don't call for anti-tank support. Your .5 Gallower will do the job. At under 200 yards, armor-piercing rounds will penetrate the engine, the sides, the turret. The bullets will go through, disabling the tank and likely killing the crew. This was not a fair fight. It was not even a contest. It was the moment when industrial warfare revealed its final verdict. No amount of spirit, no depth of sacrifice, no brilliance of tactics can overcome the cold, relentless mathematics of production, design, and resource allocation. The Ha-Go tanks on Saipan and on every Pacific battlefield thereafter, were more than obsolete machines. They were symbols of an impossible situation, a nation ordered to fight a global superpower with tools built for local policing. They represented the consequences of strategic choices made in the 1930s to prioritize naval and air power over ground forces, to believe that fighting spirit could compensate for material inferiority, to assume that early victories proved long-term viability. When those first .50 caliber rounds punched through Ha-Gos armor on June 17, 1944, they proved something that would echo through the rest of the war and into history. In industrial warfare between modern nations, production capacity matters, design philosophy matters, and resource allocation matters. The Japanese tankers who climbed into their Ha-Gos that morning believed they were going into battle with reliable, capable machines. By sunset, those who survived knew the truth. They had been sent to die in armor so thin that machine gun bullets went straight through. They had been given equipment adequate for the war Japan planned to fight in the 1930s, but utterly inadequate for the war Japan found itself fighting in the 1940s. And there was nothing they could do about it, except continue serving, continue fighting, and continue dying in machines that could not protect them.